I always hated the night shift. I mean, who doesn't? But when you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, working at a gas station that's miles from any other human being, you don't get to be picky. And the thing about working a night shift at a gas station out here in Idaho, it's not like the movies. There's no romantic idea of long, lonely hours spent sipping coffee and listening to the hum of the pumps. It's quieter than that. So quiet that it feels like the world has stopped moving altogether. It's a gas station, sure, but the place is as isolated as you can get. No towns nearby, no other businesses, just the road stretching endlessly, the mountains looming in the distance, and the occasional car driving by. Not a whole lot of traffic either. You'd think a station on the edge of the wilderness would get a lot of out-of-towners, but most people just fill up at the station by the highway or head straight to town if they're low on gas. But that doesn't mean I'm ever truly alone. When I started, the manager, Jim, gave me a list of rules. He said it with this weird, almost playful smile, but something about the way he said it made me nervous. I thought it was just the usual night shift kind of paranoia, something to make you feel more aware, like a twisted survival guide for a boring job. But then, as the days stretched on, I realized he wasn't kidding. The first rule was simple enough. Make sure the front door's locked by midnight. Okay, fair enough. I had no reason to think otherwise. But the way Jim said it was strange. There was a hesitation, a flicker in his eyes when he mentioned it, like he wasn't telling me everything. Lock it by midnight, he said again, and don't open it after that unless you've got a good reason. Don't open it for anyone, not even if they're knocking. I laughed it off. Sure, I'd heard weird stories before, but I didn't think it was anything serious. I mean, this was Idaho, not some haunted ghost town or forgotten stretch of highway. But then the first night rolled around, and I learned quickly that Jim wasn't joking. Around 3:45 p.m., I was sitting behind the counter, flipping through an old book I found on the dusty shelf by the register. The whole station had this odd, musty smell, like old leather and motor oil, and it felt like time had forgotten it. The glow of the fluorescent lights buzzed above me, and outside, the air was thick and still, like the world was holding its breath. That's when I heard it. A knock at the door, a sharp, quick knock. I froze. I had been here a week already, and not a single soul had walked in past dark. The occasional trucker, sure, but tonight? Nothing. So, hearing a knock from outside? That was new. I glanced at the clock. 11:58 p.m. I could see the silhouette of someone standing by the door, their figure barely visible through the tinted glass. They didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there. I felt a weird shiver crawl down my spine. Jim's words echoed in my head, that strange hesitation in his voice when he'd said, "Don't open the door." I didn't want to risk it. The rule was clear. No one after midnight, but curiosity got the better of me. I stood up and walked cautiously to the door, peeking through the glass. The figure outside was tall, wearing a coat, but I couldn't make out any features. They just stood there, motionless. "Hey," I called out, my voice breaking the silence of the night. "Can I help you?" No response. I took a step closer, and then they turned. I couldn't see their face. The shadows were too thick. But there was something strange about the way they moved. Their head twisted just a little too far, like something was pulling it around, snapping it into place. My heart skipped. I stumbled back from the door. That's when I heard it again, the knock. But this time it was different. Slower, deeper. A hollow, rhythmic sound that seemed to echo in the air. I couldn't see them anymore. The figure was gone, vanished into the night. I stared at the door for a long moment, my breath catching in my chest. Then, without even thinking, I reached for the lock and twisted it. Click. I didn't know what had just happened, but the feeling of dread was thick in the air. I felt like I was being watched. I turned and walked back to the counter, my heart pounding, the quiet of the gas station swallowing me whole again. But the knock, it lingered in my head, a sound that wouldn't leave. And that was when I realized something. I had followed the rule. I had locked the door, but there was no one there to knock on it. At least, not anymore. The knock had been unsettling, sure, but I tried to chalk it up to the silence of the night playing tricks on me. I had a feeling the isolation of the station was starting to mess with my head. There wasn't much else to do but wait for the hours to tick by. It wasn't like I was going to get any customers in this remote stretch of land, especially this late. The nearest town was 30 miles away, and the few cars that passed through were usually speeding down the highway like they couldn't wait to leave. The rest of the night dragged on like that. I tried to read, but I couldn't focus on the pages, my mind replaying that knock. At some point, I switched the lights off outside. No reason to keep them on in the dead of night. I'd learned early that the light was just an invitation for trouble. The more isolated you make yourself, the less likely anyone will notice you. At least, that's how I tried to reason with it. Then came the next rule. Before Jim had left, he'd handed me the keys to the back office and said, "You need to lock yourself in after 1 a.m. Don't stay in the main station. Don't leave the office." He'd given me that same strange smile, one that lingered like he knew something I didn't. I had no idea what that was supposed to mean, but I wasn't about to ask. Around 1:15 a.m., I grabbed the keys and went to the back office. It was a small room behind the register with a locked door and an old desk covered in papers. The walls were lined with shelves full of dusty receipts and stock records. The air in there was stale, like it hadn't been opened in years. I was supposed to stay in that room, I guess to keep away from anything outside. That's what Jim had implied, but it didn't make sense. I locked the door behind me. I sat at the desk, the quiet buzzing of the fluorescent lights above my head a constant companion. I tried to get some sleep, but the odd sense of unease didn't leave me. I felt exposed, even though I was in a locked room. Then came the sound, a soft scrape, like something dragging across the floor. I froze. I knew what that sound was. It was coming from the other side of the room. I didn't dare look, but my eyes kept flicking over to the corner where I thought I had seen a shadow move. I sat there in silence, waiting for another sound, another sign. Nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room anymore. The scrape came again, louder this time. I glanced up and saw something at the door. A figure. A shadow. Not a person, but something else. It was tall, elongated. The way it twisted in the dim light, it looked wrong. There were no footsteps, no sound of movement. It just was. I did the only thing I could think of. I stood up, heart pounding in my chest, and took a step toward the door. But the moment I reached for the handle, the figure disappeared. Just like that. I stood there, staring at the empty space where it had been. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sure what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't just my imagination. I stepped away from the door, my hand shaking as I fumbled for the keys in my pocket. I unlocked the office door and crept out into the station. Everything looked normal. Everything felt normal. The shelves, the counter, the old soda machine in the corner. But it wasn't. It was never going to be normal again. I checked the security cameras again. The footage from earlier had the same thing I had already seen. Nothing. It was as if nothing had happened. No figure, no shadow, no strange sound. But I knew what I saw. I glanced over at the door. I had locked it. But still, I had a feeling someone or something was waiting outside. The door was still locked, but the low scrape echoed again. This time it was louder, closer. I could hear it more clearly now. It was almost like nails dragging across concrete. I didn't want to look. I really didn't, but something inside me pushed me toward it. I needed to know. I needed to see. I slowly, hesitantly made my way over to the door. There it was again. A figure, this time clearer, standing in front of the glass. And just like last time, it turned its head slowly, unnaturally far to meet my gaze. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for the lock. Slowly, quietly, it clicked. The door opened, but there was no one there. No figure, no shadow, just the faintest whisper of air brushing against my skin. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the empty night. The wind had picked up a little, rustling the small cluster of trees across the lot, but otherwise, nothing. The station was silent, the dim glow of the lights casting long shadows on the cracked asphalt. I stepped outside, cautiously, keeping my eyes trained on the dark horizon. No movement, no figures, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I closed the door behind me, locking it firmly. The air was cold, and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stave off the chill. My feet felt heavy as I walked back inside, my mind racing with questions. What was that? What did I see? I knew I hadn't imagined it. There was no way I could have. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The last thing I needed was to freak out. I had a job to do, and I had no idea what else was out here. I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out. The clock on the wall ticked, marking the passage of time in the silent station. I decided to keep busy. Maybe working would help clear my head. I headed over to the shelves to straighten the displays, but my hands were shaking too much. Every creak in the building made my pulse spike. I couldn't stop looking at the door, half expecting something, or someone, to appear on the other side. That's when I remembered Jim's warning. Don't go near the pumps after 3 a.m. I hadn't paid much attention to it at the time. I'd assumed it was just some odd regulation or an attempt to keep me from going out there alone in the dark, but now something about it seemed important. I glanced over at the clock. 2:45 a.m., just 15 minutes until 3. I had a feeling that, whatever was happening, it was connected to that time. The minutes dragged on, each second stretching longer than the last. The sound of the wind outside picked up, the howling of it against the walls growing louder, like it was trying to push its way inside. I kept glancing at the clock. Finally, the hour struck. I waited, nothing. But then the lights flickered. The flickering started slow, almost like a malfunction, but then it became more frantic. The fluorescent bulbs overhead buzzed as they flickered erratically, casting strange, disjointed shadows across the station. I could hear the faint buzz of the outside lights, too, flickering in rhythm with the ones inside. I grabbed the flashlight from behind the counter. The beam cut through the darkened room as I turned it on. I glanced out the window and froze. Pumps. They were moving. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But no. I could see it clearly. Slow. Deliberate. As if the pumps were being dragged across the lot by invisible hands. They moved ever so slightly, the metal screeching against the asphalt. The air was thick with the hum of electricity, and I could hear a low, almost rhythmic noise, like something heavy being dragged, just barely perceptible above the wind. I couldn't look away. The movement was so unnatural, so wrong. I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The flashlight slipped from my hands and clattered to the floor, but I didn't care. The lights inside the station flickered once more, and I glanced up just in time to see something else. A shadow. A figure standing by the pumps. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a shape I could recognize. It was tall, far too tall, and its limbs stretched in unnatural angles, like it had been bent and twisted in ways that defied biology. It just stood there, motionless, beneath the flickering lights. I felt like I was suffocating. It seemed to know I was watching. It turned its head slowly, locking its dark, featureless gaze onto me. I couldn't breathe. The door to the station opened with a creak, and the shadow took a step toward me. It wasn't a sound of footsteps. There was no scrape, no shuffle. It simply moved. Couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't breathe. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Then I remembered Jim's voice. "Don't open the door. Never open the door." The shadow seemed to grow taller as it stepped forward. The wind outside howled louder. It was almost as if the whole world had shifted. The walls of the station creaked and the lights went out. Total darkness. For a few long moments, the world was still, and I couldn't even hear the wind anymore. I was alone in the silence. My heart thudded in my chest, and I could feel the sweat gathering on my palms. I wasn't alone. I heard the scrape again, the low, dragging sound. The figure was still out there, and it was moving closer. And then, I saw it. Just a sliver of light from the moon, a crack in the door. And there it was. A pale, skeletal hand stretched through the gap, fingers twitching. I slammed the door shut. The lights flickered back on and everything was still. The air was thick with tension, the silence so oppressive that it felt like the walls were closing in on me. I felt my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. I stared at the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for the figure to break through. But it didn't. It stayed silent. But the rules, the strange rules, they were never meant to be broken. I wasn't supposed to have opened the door, and now I was about to find out what would happen next. The quiet after the door slammed shut was suffocating. My heart hammered in my chest, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the spot where I had last seen that hand. Pale, bony, and impossibly long. The lights flickered again. Not like before. It wasn't a malfunction this time. This flickering felt deliberate. It was like the station was reacting, pulsating in rhythm with my anxiety. Each flicker seemed to grow more intense, more chaotic, until the lights finally cut out completely. The silence was overwhelming. For a moment, I stood frozen, my mind scrambled to process what was happening. The only sound was the faint hum of the old fridge behind the counter, and the strange rhythmic scraping coming from outside. Box was it, dragging itself along the ground? I needed to do something. I needed to call for help, to break this cycle, but my hands were shaking too much to even grab my phone. The rules Jim had given me echoed in my mind. Never open the door. Never go near the pumps after 3 a.m. Don't talk to anyone who comes in. But what if I already had? I glanced around the darkened station, the shadows growing longer as the minutes passed. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the windows, as if urging me to do something, anything, to break the stillness. That's when I heard it. A soft knock. The sound was so faint at first I almost thought it was a figment of my imagination. But then it came again, knocking, slowly, methodically. I froze. The knock wasn't from the front door. It was coming from the back, the door that led to the storage room and the maintenance area. I stepped closer, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The knock came again. It was louder this time. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave, to get out of this place and never look back. But something kept me rooted to the spot. Something deep inside me told me that whatever was knocking wasn't just looking for a way in. It was trying to get my attention. I crept toward the back door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The rules rushed back to my mind. Don't open the door. Never open the door. But what if I didn't? What if the knocking was a test, a way for it to get in? I had to be smart. I had to. The door swung open with a creak, its rusty hinges protesting against the silence of the station. And there it was. A tall figure stood in the doorway. It was covered in layers of thick, weathered clothes, too many for the warm night air. Its face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but I could feel its eyes on me, piercing through the shadows. I didn't recognize it. I had never seen this person before. But the rules, they were clear. "Can I help you?" My voice was barely a whisper, trembling against the silence. The figure didn't speak. It just stood there, unmoving. Its posture was unnaturally stiff, like it was forced into that position. The longer I stared, the more I felt a growing sense of dread. The air around me felt thick, like I was breathing through a blanket. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something behind this person, something that wasn't quite right, something that was waiting. I stepped back, my hand still on the door. Are you lost?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure if I wanted an answer. The figure tilted its head, as if considering my question. Then it took a slow step forward. My heart skipped a beat. I slammed the door shut without thinking, my pulse racing. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a voice. Soft. Hollow. A whisper. "You've broken the rule." I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was happening, or who or what was standing outside. But I knew one thing for sure. I had messed up. I've opened the door. And whatever came with that knock, whatever was waiting, wasn't gonna let me off that easy. I backed away from the door, glancing nervously at the clock. It was 3:10. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so exposed, so vulnerable. The rules had kept me safe, or so I thought, but now they seemed like nothing more than a desperate attempt to keep something worse from happening. The walls of the station creaked again, and I looked up in time to see the lights flicker once more. But this time, the light wasn't just flickering. It was stuttering, flashing erratically, as if it were trying to force something out of its reach. Something inside the walls. And then, the humming. It was louder now, the same rhythmic scraping sound I'd heard earlier. But it wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was inside the station. The air grew colder. I felt it on the back of my neck, cold fingers brushing against my skin, like something was standing just behind me. I couldn't look. I couldn't even breathe. But the rules, I knew. I had to stick to them. The moment I broke one, there was no going back. My feet moved on their own, stepping away from the back door, retreating toward the front of the station. My mind was screaming at me to leave, but there was nowhere to go. The door I'd shut earlier was now shaking, rattling violently, as if someone was trying to get through. The shadow outside loomed closer, a thick, almost tangible presence pressing against the glass. I glanced at the phone behind the counter, but I knew it wouldn't help. No one would be able to reach me in time. I had to face it, and I had no idea what that meant. I backed into the counter, my body tense, eyes locked on the door. It wasn't just a figure standing outside anymore. It was something else. The shadows shifted, twisting unnaturally, like they were alive, breathing, moving toward me. The figure was still there, its silhouette sharp and looming against the flickering lights. But now it seemed to be growing, becoming something larger, something darker. The knocking started again, soft at first, like a tap, tap, tap from just beyond the threshold. Then it grew, louder, more insistent, as though the very air outside the door was being pressed upon. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The rules ran through my mind like an incessant chant. Don't open the door. Don't engage with the outside. Don't make contact with it. But I had already broken one of the rules, hadn't I? I had opened the door. I'd let something inside that shouldn't have been here. The lights above me flickered again, and this time they stayed off, plunging the station into near complete darkness. A hollow silence settled over everything. Not even the usual hum of the old fridge broke it. The silence felt like it was pressing down on me from all sides, thick and suffocating, like the air had changed somehow, turning heavier with each passing second. I knew something was coming, something I couldn't stop. But what? There was no more knocking, no more tapping. The figure outside remained, but now it stood perfectly still, watching me through the thick layers of darkness. I turned my gaze toward the security monitor. The camera feed from the pumps showed nothing. The empty lot beyond the station was just that, empty, save for the odd glint of something pale reflecting in the faint starlight. I squinted, trying to make sense of the shapes that shifted beyond the station's lights, but my eyes wouldn't focus properly. The image kept blurring, distorting in and out of clarity, like something was standing just out of view of the camera, too close. My chest tightened. My breath felt too loud in my ears. I wasn't alone anymore. I knew that for sure now. The temperature in the room plummeted suddenly, like a wave of cold air had rushed through the vents. My fingers numbed, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me, but it didn't help. My breath fogged in the air. Then came a sound, so quiet, so subtle that I almost missed it. A whisper. It was faint at first, but as I strained to listen, it grew louder, clearer. It was coming from the back of the station, from the storage room. A voice. An old, raspy voice, barely more than a breath. "Don't you let it in." The words were almost lost to the silence, but they pierced through me like an icy needle. I looked over my shoulder toward the storage room door, and for a brief second, I saw something. A pale figure, shifting in the shadows just beyond the doorway. My breath caught. I couldn't move. The rules, they screamed in my head, louder than any of the whispers. I had to leave, but I knew I couldn't. I had already broken the rules, and there was no escaping the consequences now. A sudden crash sounded from the back room, followed by the distinct scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floor. The scraping was slow, deliberate, like it was searching for something. Or someone. The voice came again. This time, it was more than a whisper. It was clearer, more distinct, and it sounded familiar. "Don't come back." My legs trembled as I took a slow step toward the door, but the moment I moved, the lights flickered back on, blindingly bright. My eyes squinted against the harsh light, and when they adjusted, I saw it. The figure from the back door, the one who had knocked. It was no longer standing in the doorway. It was inside the station, just beyond the counter, moving toward me. Its face was pale, featureless except for two hollow, dark eyes that seemed to stare right through me. Its body was wrapped in thick layers of torn clothing, caked in dirt, as if it had crawled out from beneath the ground itself. The smell of decay was overwhelming, sickening, and it made me gag. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The air around it felt oppressive, like it was sucking the life out of everything it touched. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. The rules flooded my mind again. Never engage. Never look into their eyes. But I couldn't look away. It came closer, its movements jerky, unnatural, like something pulled it along instead of allowing it to walk. The cold that had descended on the room deepened as it got closer, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. And then I realized what I was seeing. It wasn't just a person. It was something else. The figure stopped just a few feet from me, its eyes locking with mine. The temperature in the room dropped even further, and I saw my breath come out in a visible puff. "You broke the rules." The voice was clear now, cutting through the silence, carrying an edge of something ancient. It was the voice of the station itself, of something far older and darker than I could understand. The figure was speaking for it now, and I was its prisoner. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My body was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to react. I was trapped in its gaze, in the pull of its presence. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure tilted its head slightly and turned away, walking back toward the storage room. It moved with that same unnatural jerky motion, dragging itself slowly across the floor. I wanted to run. I wanted to do anything but stand there, but I was paralyzed. The door to the storage room creaked open, and the figure stepped inside, disappearing from view. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there in silence, the cold pressing against me, suffocating me. The lights flickered once more, but this time I didn't even flinch. I knew what was happening. I knew what was coming. The rules had been clear, but now I had learned there are rules you cannot break. By the time the last shift came around, I had no illusions left. The strange occurrences, the unexplainable rules, and the growing feeling that something was watching, waiting, had gnawed at me enough to leave me questioning my grip on reality. But it didn't stop. I took my place behind the counter, hands shaking as I punched in the register. The gas station's usual hum of fluorescent lights above me felt louder, more insistent than ever. The wind outside had picked up, howling in that eerie way that made the night feel like it had a life of its own. It was colder than usual too, even for Idaho. But it wasn't the wind that rattled me. No, it was the fact that tonight, I hadn't followed the rules. I had ignored them just once, and now I was paying for it. The bell above the door chimed. My eyes snapped up. There, standing in the doorway, was the old man in the green coat. The same man who had come in every night before and had always left without a word, just like all the others. Except tonight, his eyes didn't look as distant. They were sharp, intent, and the coldness in his expression, the way his jaw tightened as he walked toward me, it wasn't the same man I remembered. "Your last shift, huh?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stared at him, trying to read what was behind that mask of indifference. The man set a can of gas station coffee on the counter, his fingers brushing against mine as I took it. His grip lingered for a moment longer than it should have, cold and rough, like something not entirely human. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "You broke the rule," he said, his voice low and knowing. I swallowed, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't do anything wrong," I stammered. "You didn't check the time," he said, almost in pity. "It's 3:18 a.m., kid. You don't close until 3:30. You'll never leave until you learn the lesson." The chill in the air deepened as I glanced toward the clock behind him. It was 3:19 now, and my heart froze. I had been on autopilot all night. I'd been doing my best to get through the shift, barely remembering the rules I had followed for months. And that was the mistake. I had missed the critical rule. Don't leave before 3:30. A heavy silence pressed in around me. The man smiled, a slow, knowing smile, as if he was waiting for me to realize something. And then, suddenly, the lights above us flickered, the store seemingly trembling. The shelves groaned. The air turned dense, like breathing underwater. My vision blurred for a moment. Everything around me seemed to warp, the room distorting into something different. What's happening?" I asked, my voice thick with panic. The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. The rules had already been broken, and as the ground beneath my feet seemed to tilt and the walls began to close in, I understood. The gas station wasn't just a place. It wasn't just a job. It was something far older, far more dangerous than I had ever guessed. And the rules? They weren't for the convenience of the workers. They were the thin lines that held this twisted reality together. When I tried to step forward, the bell above the door rang once more. I turned to see the doors swing open, but not with the wind I'd expected. No, it was as if it was being pulled open by something that wasn't supposed to exist. And then I heard it, a faint whisper that chilled me to my bones. "You should have followed the rules." I couldn't look away. In the doorway, a figure stood, unfamiliar and yet familiar. It was me. Not the me I knew, but another me. Pale, eyes hollow, like a reflection cracked across two parallel realities. I reached out, but the store snapped back into focus. The man in the green coat was gone. The wind had ceased. The clock on the wall read 3:30, and I knew, with a sinking certainty, that the night would repeat itself again and again.